Thousands of working-class girls across the United Kingdom were systematically targeted for sexual abuse by organized grooming gangs. When the evidence of these crimes reached the authorities, the institutions tasked with protecting these citizens, the police and local politicians, chose instead to actively cover up the mass abuse rather than prosecute the perpetrators. The victims themselves faced a system that treated them as the problem. They were gaslit, instructed to remain silent to maintain a fragile illusion of social cohesion, and in some documented cases, even arrested for their own hypothetically disorderly behavior. The motivation behind this deliberate institutional blindness was political self-preservation. Officials were terrified of being labeled Islamophobic, choosing instead to protect the public image of their multicultural initiatives. The state made a calculated decision. It sacrificed its most defenseless citizens to preserve an elite political ideology. Clinical psychologist Jordan Peterson looks at this tragedy through the lens of a broader geopolitical question. What actually happens when entirely different cultural operating systems are forced to integrate? This map shows the political makeup of the 50 Muslim-majority countries. Overwhelmingly, 80%, roughly 40 nations, function as fully authoritarian regimes. Only 3 stand out as exceptions: Morocco, Turkey, and Indonesia, and even these are only approximate democracies. This track record provides a stark statistical reality. It severely challenges the political assumption that all global cultures automatically mesh with Western democratic norms. Western democracy operates on the foundational premise of popular sovereignty. Laws are man-made, entered into by voluntary agreement, and remain subject to continuous debate, update, and improvement. Fundamentalist Islamic governance operates on a completely opposed framework, guided by Sharia. In this schematic showing ideological structures, the divine law block drops down from the top, illustrating how fundamentalist interpretations view God's law as absolute and immutable, entirely overriding any human legislation below it. Some argue that Shura, the Islamic principle of consultation, is equivalent to Western democracy. Historically, Shura has functioned as a top-down, elite-imposed system of governance among a select group of scholars or leaders, a method clearly reflected in the selection of caliphs. It is not an electoral process involving universal suffrage. Treating a system built on divine submission as easily interchangeable with one built on popular sovereignty ignores a profound ideological opposition. Moving from geopolitical theory to daily life, this ideological divide creates the harshest realities for women living under traditional Islamic jurisprudence. These systems enforce a systemic loss of autonomy. A typical woman living in these authoritarian countries generally requires a male guardian's permission to exercise basic rights like marriage, employment, and travel. Deep inequalities are codified directly into family and property law. Women receive a lesser inheritance share. Polygamy is legally permitted, and men possess the exclusive right to easily and unilaterally divorce. This structural bias extends into the judicial system itself. As this graphic illustrates, the scale tips heavily to one side, legally weighting a woman's testimony at half the value of a man's. When these heavily patriarchal norms are imported into Western countries like the UK without an expectation of assimilation, severe societal friction is guaranteed. If a cultural framework fails to treat its own mothers and daughters with equality, it is statistically and logically highly unlikely to respect the rights, bodily autonomy, and religious freedoms of outsiders. Peterson points to a biological and psychological axiom. There is a direct correlation between high social status and low physical vulnerability. As turbulent elements strike the bottom, the top tier remains perfectly shielded. Applying this to modern politics explains a lot. The cultural and political elites who design and champion unchecked multicultural policies are perfectly insulated in affluent, protected neighborhoods. They can continuously flaunt their cosmopolitan tolerance and progressive virtues without ever interacting with the negative consequences of the policies they facilitate. The fatal flaw of this type of elite governance is that the decision-makers are entirely shielded from the real-world destruction caused by their ideological errors. There is a harsh historical reality here. When the aristocrats catch a cold, the working class tends to die of pneumonia. The entire burden of this self-serving multicultural blind spot fell squarely on the most unprotected demographic in the United Kingdom: working-class adolescent females. While the systemic gang rapes were horrific acts of cruelty, the cowardly institutional cover-up by the very authorities sworn to protect these girls was a total betrayal of foundational democratic duties. A functioning civil society and good governance cannot exist without a shared foundation of human rights and mutual respect. Ignoring profound ideological incompatibilities under the guise of open-minded tolerance does not create a diverse utopia. It breeds systemic gaslighting and guarantees the sacrifice of society's most vulnerable.